Good morning, everybody. It's Cathy here at the Magical Urban Vegetable Garden. I hope your Sunday is going well, and if you pop in now or later, grab your coffee or tea, and let's just chill a little bit and have some garden chat. So I wanted to address today some tips for something that's a really big topic going around in gardening circles these days, especially with beginners, well, any kind of gardener or whatever, um, is the change in climates that we're all seeing, the higher heat temperatures and the lack of water and, drought that's going on in so many areas. And it's like, how do you keep your gardens alive? How do you grow food for your families? Because it's a big issue. Grocery store shelves are not always as well stocked as they used to be. And let's face it, the prices are going up. They're going up and up and up. Hey, Chris, how are you? Um, it's a big issue. And so here's some tips that I've learned. When I was younger, I lived out in the southern end of the Okanagan. If you don't know where that is in British Columbia, it's a semi-desert area. It's really good for growing wine and everything, but it's dry. Um, Growing wine, like wine, grapes for wine. There's a huge market there for, and a lot of agriculture that goes on that thrives in very dry conditions. Um, so I just want you to know it's something that I've lived in before and dealt with in gardening. Now back when I lived there though, especially commercial irrigation was a big thing, or putting big sprinklers on and letting them run several hours a day. And we know now that that kind of those kind of sprinklers, you lose so much to evaporation, especially in the heat like that. And it just, there's just better ways to do it, especially if you have a smaller space, or maybe you're not like a commercial farmer. um, we're just trying to grow vegetables and tomatoes and stuff in our for our own households. So here's some tips, and I'll get into where some of this has come from in a bit too. From my dad, who grew up in various parts of Africa where it was very hot in the dry season, and there's just a lot of resources here, things that I learned just from him teaching us, as we were growing up as well. So the first thing, especially if you're a beginner gardener, is understanding that there's different types of things that are going to grow in different seasons. When it starts getting hot, for example, things like your lettuces and mesclun mixes and a lot of mustard greens, they don't thrive in the heat. They tend to be cooler weather vegetables, and so you'll find that they're going to bolt, which means that they shoot up seed stalks, they get bitter, they just don't thrive in the heat. And the thing to remember is that this is normal. You haven't done anything wrong. And so you pull them up, or maybe you want to save one or two for seed, for the next season. But you go on to growing other things that thrive in the summer heat. And then in the fall, or towards fall, you can start planting these things again to have a continuous crop through the cooler weather in the fall. This is where, plan it out in your daily planners or your monthly planners, in your gardening journals and stuff. This is where having continuous harvest and eating and growing in season comes from, right? But you can also look for seeds, that are either hybrids. Maybe they're labeled in your seed company, like when I go to All West Seeds, or West Coast Seeds. They have a lot of different lettuces and spinaches and things like that, and they'll be labeled like bolt resistant or, heat resistant, or, which means that they tend to do better in warm weather. So you might get a few weeks, more out of a planting than if you were planting an heirloom that really thrives in the cold weather. I hope that makes sense. Now, let's see. I can't see the screen here very well. But look for things like, maybe you really like spinach. I came across here a couple of years ago a type of spinach called Ethiopian spinach, and it actually grows as like a almost like a little shrub. And so you still have spinachy leaves, but it grows very different from the stuff that we're used to with European type spinach, where it all grows in a row, and then it goes to seed when it's too hot, and you harvest from the rows. So look for different types of things that maybe will do better through the warmer parts of late spring and early summer than what we normally have. We have options now, right? Which is where the fun comes in gardening. It's like, oh, I'm going to try this. And keep records in your garden planner. Make sure that you can remember what it was you did next year, how well it worked. The next thing is to choose a watering system that works for the garden you have. Now, maybe it's a container garden, maybe it's just a very small vegetable patch. And especially if you're on water shortages, you probably can't just put a sprinkler out, which we know wastes water. So you want to have something that is going to be, appropriate for the use that you get out of it, and you're going to make the most out of your resources. Now, maybe you can't go out and water, or you can't, it's just not practical to get even a small, watering system on a timer. I mean, I think you can do pretty much anything these days, but maybe you just aren't quite there yet. You can get, I didn't grab it from my other garden there to show you, but you can get like sprinklers that have like multi-heads on them. And so you're not spraying like the big old oscillating sprinklers that throw water up into the sunlight and it looks beautiful, but you are losing a lot of the moisture just to the heat and evaporation. And you can get ones that have different settings, and they're low. So if you put them out in the garden, even in the evening when it's hot out or whenever it is that you water, it's putting it right to the roots of the plants, and you can have different settings. It's not a huge watering system. I hope that makes sense. But you can water deeply every few days, and you can, manage that much better. A tool that I really like is those wands with the multi-heads, because especially I tend to notice my back is a little more stiff these days. I don't know about you. Maybe as you hit middle age, it's, I don't know, maybe your back is stronger than mine. But it's very handy to have a wand also with the multi-heads. It has the shower, it has the spray, it has the stream. You can do different things. But you can actually stand. I actually like coming up to my greenhouse or my garden in the early morning with a cup of coffee and watering. But I can put it out on like a gentle rain setting and just water, for 30 or 40 seconds or whatever to the roots of the plants that I want watered, like my tomatoes. And I can still have that time to do it without it becoming a lot of work, right? When you have like container gardens especially, go take a look on Amazon. I went looking on Amazon a while back just to see what resources there were. You have, you felt like that this morning? Yeah, I know it happens. The body just doesn't loosen up quite as quickly as it used to, hey? But you can get like little soaker hoses that you can put through to multiple containers, and there you have like a reservoir that you fill up. And they didn't cost very much. I think there's different ones. You'd have to go look and find one that has good reviews, and obviously that works for you. But you fill the reservoir up and you have a little timer on it. And so throughout the day, even if you're at work or you're away or whatever, all your more sensitive plants that really need, that extra moisture are going to get it. And there's plants and vegetables out there that, they really don't like to dry out. There's some that are fine with the heat and, fluctuations in moisture. They like to be dry. I find peppers tend to be like that. Peppers, you don't want to water too much. They thrive on being barely damp. And so while it's important they don't dry out, they have a very different watering needs from your peas and lettuce. They like to stay wet. They like to stay damp. And once they dry out, especially a couple of times, they tend to be done. Right? You're not going to get any more out of them because they just don't thrive in that. But the big one here, especially if you have an outside garden or a greenhouse, or even in your container gardens, is providing shade. If you are having extremely hot weather, providing shade or afternoon shade, when it's hottest out with good circulation is really important. And here's a couple of tips on how to do that. And this is where my dad always taught us, from when he was growing up in Africa. They lived in South Africa for a few years, and then they were up in what was Zaire at the time. I think it's Zambia now. And you have your rainy season and you have your dry season. And, very different growing requirements. But the heat, as they were helping the villages and stuff that they were in, have better food resources and, not having the starvation months, by planting long-term crops and whatever, was that the heat from the sun, it's a killing heat, right? And if you live in places like Arizona or whatever, you're going to know what I'm talking about, because your requirements are going to be very different from mine. And so my grandparents, at that time, this would have been back in the 50s, right? It was still very easy to get like huge bolts of just cotton cloth and cheap, very cheap, and they would put like pegs through the rows and beds of all the gardens, and so it could be rolled up early in the mornings, so, for weeding and watering and whatever. But as it started getting hot out, they would roll the covers over the top to shade it from the sun, through the afternoons, so that the plants would continue to thrive and grow. Now, it was open underneath, providing circulation, which is really important, but it cut that edge to the sun. So now, of course, you can't go and buy, cheap cotton. But a really great resource, and I have mentioned this for other reasons, is your floating row covers. Again, go on Amazon, look up floating row covers. You'll see what I mean. You can probably buy them at your local garden centers, but if they don't have them, get some. They come in 25-foot lengths. They're quite cheap. You can get different thicknesses. There's usually light, medium, and heavyweight. And the lightweight, is really used in summer especially. It's good for tucking around your rows and keeping pests out, like your carrot rust flies and cabbage moths, while still providing circulation. But maybe you need to shade, and there's easy ways to do this, okay? You can build your own hoop houses really easy. Go to your hardware store and get a roll of, fairly heavy gauge wire. Okay, it won't cost a lot, but you can take and decide how high you want your hoops over your beds or your rows, and cut them or put them in, stick them in quite deep, and you will have hoops to put your floating row covers over. In emergencies, I have used tomato cages. I've gone and stuck sticks of kindling in the ground. Like, there's all kinds of, use what you got. But I mean, if you're wanting it to look neat and tidy and can take the time, cut some lengths, get wire cutters, cut your proper lengths of your hoops, and, just stick them really good into the soil so they're sturdy and not falling over, and you can put your floating row covers over top. Now, depending on how hot the sun is and how much it shines through, depending on the opacity of your floating row covers, maybe you'll need to use a double length. They're still pretty inexpensive. And you can take with, maybe the sun goes to one side, you can actually use clothespins or, whatever works for you to make sure that there's a bit of space to one side for airflow. You can have it part way up on the other. It's easy enough to adjust, with clothespins. Go to your dollar store. You can still water through them. There's ways to do this. And the same thing with your greenhouse. I mean, I've seen, you can get, greenhouse shade covers and stuff, but they're expensive. They're expensive. I would, I've never needed to actually provide shade on my greenhouse just because of where I live. But if I did, I would use heavyweight floating row covers, just to the side where the sun is hot in the afternoon from one end to the other. Maybe use a few zip ties or however it is to secure it through the heat wave. and provide that shade and circulation. Make sure you've got even a fan in there to help suck air through, so that there's some sort of ventilation for your plants. But the key, of course, one of the biggest things, and I talk about this everywhere, is mulching. You knew I was going to say that, right? Mulching your soil, it doesn't matter if it's your greenhouses, your container gardens, your raised beds, your whatever it is, mulching is key to using a lot less water, especially in water shortages, and to keeping your plants healthy and alive. Um, I use dull newspaper or cardboard. I'll put it down and make sure everything's watered well underneath. You water the newspaper and cardboard down so it really mats down. And then I add in, grass clippings as we mow the lawns, and, leaves and all sorts of things. And it provides an insulation. And so you'll come into the greenhouse, and the greenhouse thermometer will be pegged at, what is it, 50? I don't even know how hot it is in here. And the tomatoes and everything are doing fine. And you reach in under that few inches of mulch, and the soil is actually still cool and damp, right? They're not having these massive fluctuations. And I don't have to water as often. I have to water more than I do in cool weather, of course. But it's not nearly as much. And when I do water, I make sure it goes right to the roots of the plant. And the mulch keeps it so that the plants are actually happy. I have found that it doesn't matter how much they like hot weather. Things like most of the peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, all those things will do better if their feet, their roots, have a more cool soil temperature, right? And more even temperature. They don't have those fluctuations. So I hope this helps. Leave me a comment below wherever it is that you watch this. And, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money to provide shade and proper watering for your plants with a lot less resources. I want you to be able to grow food and flowers and, all the things that you like and need close to hand without having to, go way over budget or losing, all your hard work. Let me know if this helps, and I'll talk to you soon here. Bye for now.